Sign this HOA agreement, or I'll have the cops drag you out by sunset." Those were the first words I heard from the woman standing on my brand new porch. No hello, no welcome, just threats. Her name was Meredith Langston, the self-proclaimed enforcer of neighborhood order, and apparently a legend in her own mind. We hadn't even unpacked a single box. My 8-year-old daughter, Emily, was still twirling in circles on our front lawn, laughing like any kid would on the first day in a new place. My grandfather, Colonel Jack Mitchell, retired, decorated, and still sharp as a blade, was unloading our kitchenware when she arrived like a storm in heels. She waved a clipboard in my face, eyes narrowed with smug authority. "This is how we do things here," she hissed. "Refuse and you'll regret moving here." I was about to tell her to leave when her gaze landed on the name Mitchell engraved on our mailbox. Her entire body stiffened. Her smirk faded. And then she whispered something under her breath that froze me. "Mitchell! Oh no! What could my family name possibly mean to her?" The moving truck hadn't even cleared the corner when Meredith Langston started circling our driveway like a hawk sizing up prey. I was still adjusting the porch light when she returned, this time with backup. 2 other residents followed behind her like flunkies. One held a folder labeled Community Standards Packet, and the other clutched a tape measure, eyes already sweeping across my lawn. It was bizarre, surreal, like we'd moved into a gated subdivision run by a cult in pastel polos. My name is Nathan Parker. I'm a systems engineer, a father, and until that moment completely unaware that a suburban nightmare could begin with a clipboard. "This is your official welcome package," Meredith announced, thrusting the folder into my chest. "Every resident is expected to comply within 72 hours of arrival. Page 3 outlines your mandatory membership with the Eastview Heights Homeowners Alliance." I flipped the cover open. The papers were dense with legal-sounding jargon, and fines for things like improper mailbox colors and non-compliant child supervision. What stood out wasn't the ridiculousness of the rules, it was the pressure. The language was aggressive, punitive, clearly designed to intimidate. "I reviewed my deed before buying the house," I replied calmly. "Eastview Heights doesn't have an active HOA. It was dissolved 4 years ago due to financial mismanagement." Meredith's expression twitched, but she quickly recovered, giving me a tight-lipped smile. "Those records must be outdated. The community voted to reinstate the HOA under a new charter. It's perfectly legal. I'd hate for your daughter to be exposed to unsafe conditions." That line crossed into threat territory. Before I could respond, my grandfather stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a towel. Colonel Jack Mitchell might have been 78, but his presence could still silence a room. His silver hair was military short, and his posture made even Meredith's minions stand straighter. "You threatening my family, ma'am?" His voice was calm, but there was steel behind it. Meredith faltered. Her eyes locked on his face, and something flickered there. Recognition. Her posture shifted, defensive, almost afraid. "Mitchell," she muttered, barely audible. "I didn't realize." "You realize now," he said. She turned on her heel and walked away, her entourage scrambling to follow. But she left behind something more telling than her threats, a printed citation notice face down on the grass. Colonel Mitchell picked it up, scanned the content, then raised a brow. "These fines are fake," he said. "There are misspelled words, mismatched fonts. Look at this seal, no embossing. Amateur forgery." He handed it to me, then looked out toward Meredith's house across the street. "We're not dealing with a nosy neighbor. This is an organized operation. She's done this before." That night we started digging. Public records showed the HOA had indeed been disbanded years ago after a failed audit revealed tens of thousands missing from the community fund. No one had been prosecuted, but the organization was formally dissolved. So how was Meredith issuing fines under its name? A deeper dive revealed something even more alarming. A company called Langston Residential Holdings had acquired 4 homes in the neighborhood in the past 2 years, all previously owned by families who'd received repeated complaints and citations. all sold under market value. Every one of them had children. She's targeting families with kids, Grandpa observed, scanning the names on the property records. Easier to intimidate parents when children are involved. He was right, and the next morning she proved just how far she was willing to go. I had just stepped into the kitchen when I heard my daughter scream, "Daddy, Grandpa." Emily was on the front lawn, frozen in fear, as Meredith leaned over her with that same clipboard. But this time, she wasn't alone. A man in his 40s stood beside her, dressed in what looked like a city inspector's uniform, complete with a badge I didn't recognize. According to their so-called rules, Emily was in violation of an unsupervised minor ordinance which didn't exist. They issued a $250 citation on the spot. But it wasn't just about money. "If this continues," the man added with a smirk, "we may have to notify child services for the safety of the neighborhood." Emily ran into my arms sobbing. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was playing hopscotch, but Meredith knew exactly how to weaponize fear. Grandpa stormed out, stepping between us and them. "Get off my property, now!" Meredith didn't argue this time. She simply smiled, gave us a mock salute, and walked away. Later that day, Grandpa pulled out a storage trunk from his closet. Inside were files, military-grade intelligence reports, maps, and dossiers. "Time to dust off the playbook," he said. Together we turned our dining room into a command center. He mapped every house Meredith had targeted. He flagged addresses where she'd been spotted delivering notices. He charted her movements. Then he called in a favor from a contact at the state attorney's office. We also installed cameras, covert high-definition motion activated. Grandpa even had old surveillance gear from his intel days. And sure enough, within 48 hours, Meredith and her inspector returned. They didn't knock, they didn't speak. They simply measured our bushes, took photos, and left another citation. What they didn't know was that we caught it all on video down to the fake badge number, and the moment the inspector used a walkie-talkie to report back, "Subject is compliant. Child indoors. Moving to next property." That was the phrase that made Grandpa freeze. He leaned into the footage and rewound. "Subject is compliant." "That's not neighbor talk," he said. "That's enforcement language. This isn't about HOA rules. This is control." When we ran the inspector's badge number, we discovered it belonged to a former notary named Brian Gates, license revoked for falsifying mortgage documents in another county. And guess who had hired him as a property consultant? Langston Residential Holdings. Suddenly, it all clicked. Meredith was using fake HOA rules, falsified citations, and fear tactics to push families into selling their homes below value, then buying them through her own shell company. A classic pressure and profit scheme. "She's turning this neighborhood into her own real estate empire," I said. "Not for long," Grandpa replied. It started with a knock at 7:43 a.m. the next morning. Not a loud knock, not aggressive, but precise 3 short taps, followed by silence. I opened the door expecting another citation, maybe even Meredith herself, but instead found a uniformed officer standing on my porch. "Mr. Parker," he asked, flipping open his badge. "Detective Eli Carter, Suburban Investigations Unit. Mind if I come in?" My heart skipped. We hadn't called anyone yet, at least not officially. But Grandpa, ever vigilant, was already at my side. "What brings you here, Detective?" he asked. Eli stepped inside, glancing around, as if to confirm we weren't armed. "This is unofficial. I got a heads up from someone at the county property office. Your name came up on a complaint form filed by a certain Meredith Langston." Grandpa chuckled dryly. "Let me guess. Accusations of harassment code. Violations, maybe even aggression toward the neighborhood." "Exactly." Eli nodded. "But here's the thing. It's the 7th time she's filed a nearly identical complaint in 18 months. Always against families with children. Always right before a below-market home sale." He pulled a slim folder from his messenger bag and handed it over. Inside were incident summaries, anonymous tips, and handwritten notes about the last 4 families that had sold their homes in the neighborhood. She's using manufactured conflict to trigger code enforcement, Eli explained. And once she pressures people out, her company scoops up the properties for a steal. We confirmed the name Langston Residential Holdings on each deed transfer. She's running a hybrid scam, Grandpa muttered. Real estate fraud mixed with social manipulation. And she's using fear of child services to break families. Eli nodded solemnly. Which is why I'm here. I believe you may be her next target. That afternoon, I reviewed our security footage with Eli. What we caught on camera was worse than anything I expected. Marcus Meredith's so-called inspector wasn't just taking pictures. He had a tiny wireless camera in his shirt button and was actively documenting my daughter through our living room windows. He even paused to zoom in on our family photos hanging in the hallway. She's not just harassing, Eli said grimly. She's collecting footage, probably editing it to use later online smear campaigns, complaints to CPS, maybe even blackmail. It felt like we were in a movie, a suburban spy thriller. Only it was real, and it was happening to us. And then the fake building inspection happened. 2 days later, while I was out running errands, Meredith sent Marcus back, but this time he wore a full construction uniform and carried a clipboard with city logos printed across it. He approached the house, waved to our camera, and marked something in red spray paint on our foundation. Then he left a note on the door. Structural violation identified. Immediate attention required. Possible condemnation notice pending. When I returned home and saw the sign, my heart sank. My wife looked terrified. Emily was hiding behind the couch. "They're going to take our house," she whispered. But Grandpa stood still, reading the note carefully. Then he snapped a photo and peeled it off. "Fake again," he said. "Look at the spacing on the text. They used a free online template. And the logo, it's a public PNG from Google." Still, the damage was done. Panic had been planted. My wife's hands shook as she tried to call the city inspection office. That's when the real threat hit us, the anonymous letter. It arrived in an unmarked envelope slipped under our door overnight. No stamp, no return address. Just one sentence typed in bold. $5,000. Leave the money at Benson Park. Pavilion 2. Your family sleeps safe. Extortion. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was holding. It didn't make sense. Not in a neighborhood like this. Not over a homeowners association. Unless, of course, it wasn't about the HOA at all. "She's escalating," Grandpa said. "She knows we're digging into her background, and now she's getting sloppy." I wanted to report it immediately, but Grandpa had other ideas. "No," he said. "We play along. Let's give her what she's never had before, an adversary who fights smarter." We arranged a decoy drop with the help of Eli, who coordinated with local law enforcement. The envelope contained fake cash and a GPS tracker. We hid 2 cameras in the surrounding trees and placed microphones inside the envelope seams. At exactly 10:00 p.m., I left the envelope at the designated location and walked away. 20 minutes later, Marcus appeared, hood-up, gloves on, scanning the area. He grabbed the envelope, gave a quick thumbs-up to a car parked 2 blocks away, and vanished. It wasn't until we reviewed the footage that we heard it. A whisper from Marcus's earpiece. "Package received. He bought it. We've got him now." Then a female voice answered. "Excellent. Time to bury him. Use the bribe footage. Edit it tight. I want his face all over next week's HOA bulletin." Bingo! We didn't just have them on camera. We had them confessing to conspiracy, blackmail, and fraud, all in their own voices. Grandpa didn't waste a second. He compiled the audio, cross-referenced Marcus's license plates from the footage, and created a complete dossier like something straight out of a Pentagon operation. But the most chilling part came next. That night after Emily went to bed, Grandpa unlocked a wooden footlocker he hadn't touched in decades. Inside were his military files, and one manila envelope marked in black ink, "For emergency use only, Sterling D." He handed it to me. "Before Tommy Sterling died in Afghanistan, he left something with me," Grandpa said. He suspected his wife Meredith of planning something: insurance fraud, identity theft. He gave me this in case anything ever happened. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were documents, receipts, and a letter written in Tommy's own handwriting. If you're reading this, it means she did what I feared. Please protect anyone she targets. Don't let her use my death to hurt others. It hit me like a brick. Meredith Langston was Meredith Sterling, Tommy's widow, and she'd been harboring a 20-year grudge against Grandpa, blaming him for her husband's death. Now she was using HOA scams to lash out, targeting families with military connections. She's not just a scam artist, Grandpa said. She's on a mission, and it ends now. I stared at Tommy Sterling's letter for a long time that night. His handwriting was firm, methodical, just like Grandpa's. His words, though 20 years old, burned off the page with an eerie clarity. She's capable of deception at every level. I caught her forging documents, applying for benefits I never authorized. She opened credit cards in my name while I was deployed. If something happens to me, don't assume it was just war. It was no longer about Meredith harassing us over bushes or sidewalks. This was personal. This was revenge cloaked in policy and paperwork. And suddenly, all her actions made grotesque sense. She wasn't just trying to ruin our family. She was trying to destroy his family. And in her eyes, that meant Grandpa. That next morning, the world outside our front door looked unchanged. Sprinklers ticked quietly. Birds chirped. Kids biked to school. But the war Meredith had declared was anything but quiet. It had turned our home into a psychological battlefield. Emily refused to go outside. My wife flinched every time a car slowed near the driveway. I wasn't sleeping, neither was Grandpa. We knew something bigger was coming. That something arrived in the form of a carefully edited smear campaign. It started with a video uploaded to the Eastview Heights Community Facebook group. The thumbnail featured Grandpa mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes intense. The caption, "Aggressive veteran confronts community volunteers. Unsafe for families." The footage had been cut and spliced, clearly taken from Meredith's surveillance efforts. It showed Grandpa raising his voice without context, me handing the decoy envelope at Benson Park with no audio, and Emily crying from the morning Meredith threatened her. The narrative that we were unstable, dangerous, anti-community. It spread fast. Within 24 hours, 3 neighbors unfriended us on social media. One mom politely declined Emily's playdate. A letter appeared in our mailbox from the so-called Neighborhood Harmony Task Force, suggesting that perhaps this neighborhood was not the best fit for our temperament. The isolation hit hard. "I never thought I'd see the day people turned on veterans," Grandpa muttered, staring at the screen where dozens of comments labeled us as toxic, suspicious, and possibly violent. But just as despair began to set in, something unexpected happened. A comment appeared under the video, then another, and another, all from veterans. One read, "That man in uniform is Colonel Jack Mitchell. He commanded my unit in Desert Storm. He's a hero, not a threat." Another, "I served under that man. He saved my life in Fallujah. Anyone who questions his integrity doesn't know the meaning of service." The tide began to shift. Veterans from across the country began commenting, sharing their stories, linking to articles about Grandpa's service. They called out the video's manipulation. They demanded answers. They overwhelmed the post with facts, respect, and unity. By evening, the smear video had been flagged so many times it was taken down. And the shift didn't stop there. A neighbor named Dave, former Marine quiet guy who lived 2 streets over, rang our doorbell with his wife and 2 kids. "I've been watching what's happening," he said. "It happened to us too. Meredith hit us with citations when my wife got pregnant. We moved out of our first home because of her. I'm done staying quiet." He handed Grandpa a flash drive containing old emails, pictures of bogus violation notices, and a recording of Meredith threatening them with child services. The timestamp was from 2 years earlier. That opened the floodgates. Over the next week, 4 more families came forward. All had similar stories: fake fines, threats, anonymous complaints, followed by pressure to sell. And every home ended up in the hands of Langston Residential Holdings. We compiled it all: dates, documents, testimonies into one massive file. Grandpa called it Operation Exodus. Meanwhile, Emily started asking harder questions. "Daddy, why do they hate us? Is it because Grandpa was a soldier?" It broke me. I sat her down, held her tiny hands, and told her the truth, age-adjusted but real. "Sweetheart, some people get hurt so badly they forget how to be kind. But your grandpa and we're going to fix this not just for us, but for every family she's hurt." Her eyes welled up, even the ones who didn't say anything. "Especially them." Grandpa nodded in approval. "Son," he said later that night, "we don't just fight for justice, we fight for the ones too scared to speak." That's when I knew we weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were exposing a pattern, a blueprint, a system. And we weren't alone. The first city council meeting was packed. Not because of a scheduled agenda item or a hot-button issue. No, this time it was personal. Over 200 residents showed up after hearing about our story through word-of-mouth veteran groups and a few gutsy local news reports that hinted at corruption festering within Eastview Heights. Grandpa stood beside me in full military dress uniform, his medals gleaming under the chamber lights. Emily held my hand with quiet courage. My wife, ever the anchor, was composed but alert. Across the room, Meredith sat flanked by two attorneys. Her face betrayed nothing but her rigid posture, and tightly clenched jaw screamed tension. The councilman in charge, a man named Trevor Ashford, called the session to order with a tired voice. "Let's keep tonight brief, folks. Community comment is limited to 2 minutes." That's when Grandpa stepped forward, letter in hand. "Sir," he said, with the command tone that had once moved platoons into action, "this statement was written by Staff Sergeant Thomas Sterling 2 weeks before he died in Afghanistan. He feared his wife, Meredith Sterling Langston, would exploit his death for financial gain. And he was right." Silence. You could hear every rustle of paper as the audience leaned forward. Grandpa read every word: Tommy's warnings about forged insurance claims, fake medical records, and intentions to profit from his death. He concluded by raising the manila envelope for all to see. This is the evidence he left behind 20 years ago. And it connects directly to the fraud, coercion, and child endangerment tactics being used by Meredith Langston right here in this neighborhood. Gasps. Whispers. One of Meredith's lawyers tried to interrupt, but was quickly shut down by Councilman Ashford, who suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. But it wasn't just about the reading of a dead man's last warning. It was what happened afterward that changed everything. Veterans stood up one by one, stating their name rank and how they'd been affected by HOA abuse. A young mom showed photos of fake citations taped to her front door. An elderly couple shared how their grandkids stopped visiting because of CPS threats that were never real. Even Dave, our Marine neighbor, stood and held up a photo of his son in NICU. "She tried to force us out during the hardest month of our life," he said. "She nearly succeeded." The community was listening now, and Meredith, she was unraveling. First, her lawyer whispered something that made her blink in shock. Then another man handed her a phone, possibly alerting her to the growing social media explosion of Tommy's letter, which we had published 10 minutes earlier. It was going viral. Fast. That was the first crack. The second came when Councilman Ashford announced that he was calling for an emergency suspension of all HOA enforcement actions pending an official fraud investigation. His tone made it clear this wasn't a choice, it was damage control. As the room emptied, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My name's Heather," she said softly. "My brother served with Tommy. He used to write letters about your grandpa. Said he was the reason he re-enlisted. Thank you for finishing what Tommy started." I didn't know what to say, I just nodded, overwhelmed. Back home, the energy shifted. Neighbors who had once avoided us now waved from across the street. One offered to help install better security lighting. Another dropped off home-cooked lasagna with a handwritten note for your family and for justice. But the real shift came when Grandpa received a call from a retired federal investigator, someone he'd worked with in his Army days. The man had been following the story from another state and offered his help. Quietly, strategically. "We'll dig deeper," he said. "You're exposing more than one neighborhood scheme. This could be national." That night, our dining room turned from a command center into a communications hub. Emails came in from families in other states who'd experienced eerily similar scams, child services, threats, fake HOAs, pressure to sell, all traced back to a few shell companies and a few names. One kept appearing: Sterling Equity Holdings, a parent company for Langston Residential. It wasn't just Meredith anymore. She was part of something larger. And we had just stepped into the heart of it. Transformation doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. After the council meeting, the adrenaline wore off, and all that remained was the raw toll the past few weeks had taken. Emily began eating again, but still refused to play outside. My wife slept more than usual, retreating to quiet corners of the house with her journal. And Grandpa, he started spending hours alone in the garage, tinkering with old gear, reorganizing boxes, labeled with military codes I couldn't decipher. For a few days, I thought we were all just decompressing. But something deeper was unfolding. I caught Grandpa late one night, sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. 20 years ago, I promised a soldier I'd protect his legacy, he said, without looking at me. And I failed. I let his wife slip through the cracks. I let her turn grief into something monstrous. "You didn't know what she'd become," I replied. He nodded slowly. "That's the problem. In war, ignorance gets people killed. In peace, it gets people exploited. Either way, families pay the price." That's when I realized this wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about healing. And that healing had to start with each of us. So we began to rebuild not just our home, but our strength. Emily's therapist recommended a project, let her design a protection plan for the house. It started as drawings of unicorns with laser beams, but quickly evolved into a full-blown home security map with real cameras, lights, and safety zones. Grandpa helped her install everything. He let her hold the flashlight while he ran wires, taught her how to speak confidently to any grown-up who tries to scare you. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. Meanwhile, my wife returned to her career with renewed clarity. She'd been a social worker before we moved, but after what happened, she redirected her skills, helping veterans' families navigate CPS investigations, especially those falsely triggered by HOA harassment. She became a lifeline to dozens of scared, isolated parents. As for me, I found purpose in the documentation. Grandpa trained me to log everything with military precision. Dates, times, locations, names. We created a digital vault of evidence, every encounter, every citation, every whisper of coercion. Not just for us, but for the dozens of other families who began sending us their stories. I met a father in Texas who'd lost custody of his son for 6 months because of a forged HOA complaint about unfit parenting. A Navy widow in Florida had sold her house under duress after anonymous CPS calls, 5 all traced back to her neighborhood's HOA president. The more we learned, the clearer it became. Meredith wasn't the only one. She was part of a network, a system built on exploiting military families, those who couldn't afford legal battles, those with PTSD triggers, those who trusted too easily. That realization hardened something inside me. We weren't just going to expose them. We were going to dismantle them. So Grandpa and I expanded our operation. We turned our dining room wall into a map strings connecting cities, names, companies. My wife built a spreadsheet tracking property transfers, correlating CPS records with HOA citations. We cross-referenced phone numbers, IP addresses, notarized documents. Our home became a war room, and the war was no longer just ours. Emily added stars to the map, each one representing a family we helped. Then a moment of unexpected validation arrived. The Department of Justice contacted Grandpa. An agent named Lisa Monroe, sharp, calm, and clearly military, had been following the reports. The volume of evidence we'd compiled, she said, had triggered a preliminary investigation into multi-state fraud targeting veterans. "Colonel Mitchell," she said during a secure video call, "your family may have just exposed the largest coordinated HOA extortion ring in the country." Grandpa didn't flinch. He just nodded once. "Then it's time we finish what Tommy started." From that point on, everything moved faster. Witnesses came forward. Whistleblowers emerged, former notaries, ex-HOA board members, even a private investigator who'd been hired years earlier to follow a veteran family in Georgia. And then we got the smoking gun, an anonymous email, no name, no subject line, just a PDF attachment titled Sterling Holdings, Internal Memo Chain. It detailed strategies for property acquisition through non-compliance escalation, CPS trigger, intimidation, and target profiling by military background. The memo included one line that chilled me to the bone. Families with prior service records are less likely to challenge authority due to conditioning. Leverage perceived chain of command mentality. They were using patriotism against patriots. When we showed it to Agent Monroe, she said one word: indictments. That night, Grandpa and I stood at the edge of our lawn, looking out over the quiet street that had once felt like a battlefield. "You know," he said softly, "they thought we'd back down, that we'd fold under pressure. But they forgot the first rule of conflict." "What's that?" I asked. He smiled. "Never underestimate a family with a mission." The courtroom was silent. Not the tense silence of anxiety, but the reverent kind. The kind you feel at a funeral or during a national anthem. Everyone in the gallery had risen as Grandpa stepped forward in full dress uniform, a folded flag cradled in his arms. This wasn't just a sentencing hearing, it was history. The Department of Justice had uncovered 17 shell companies tied to the same HOA extortion network. Sterling Holdings, Langston Residential Eastside Equity, and others, each responsible for hundreds of fabricated citations, fake inspections, and CPS-triggered intimidation targeting military and veteran families across 5 states. At the center of it all stood Meredith Langston, formerly Meredith Sterling, widow of Staff Sergeant Tommy Sterling, now convicted of wire fraud, conspiracy, forgery, impersonation of a government official, and federal harassment. She sat hunched beside her attorney eyes, dark wrists shackled. The weight of 20 years of schemes had finally collapsed into a single word: guilty. But justice didn't feel vengeful. It felt sacred. Grandpa took the stand not to gloat but to honor. "My name is Colonel Jack Mitchell, retired. I appear today not as a victim, but as a custodian of the truth." He unfolded the letter. The same one Tommy wrote before his death. The one that started it all. He didn't read it this time. The court already had copies. The media had broadcast it. The public had wept over it. Instead, Grandpa held it aloft for one long moment, then handed it to the judge. "My soldier died, believing his voice would never be heard. But he was wrong." The judge nodded solemnly. "Let it be entered into the permanent record." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Outside, reporters waited. Protesters held signs thanking veterans. Neighbors who once avoided our family now brought coffee and warm hugs. Emily stood proudly beside her mother, holding a photo of Tommy, smiling in uniform, forever young. And just like that, a man long buried became the face of reform. Within weeks, new legislation was introduced, the Sterling Act, a federal initiative to increase penalties for HOA abuse, protect veteran families from fraudulent enforcement, and establish oversight of neighborhood associations that had long operated unchecked. It passed unanimously. Even the most hardened politicians couldn't argue with the moral clarity of a child's drawing taped to the Senate podium stick figures of a little girl hugging her grandpa beneath the words, "Safe now." Emily had drawn it. They didn't even ask for another visual aid. The story spread across the country. Families who had suffered in silence found courage. Class action lawsuits were filed. Whistleblower protections were extended. HOA boards across America began restructuring. But the most beautiful part, healing. Real, tangible, unshakable healing. Emily started playing outside again, first under watchful eyes, then freely. She helped plant flowers with the neighbors, including the woman who once reported us anonymously. Forgiveness had bloomed where suspicion once lived. My wife opened a nonprofit Shielded Hearts offering legal support and crisis counseling for families impacted by HOA abuse. Grandpa, now affectionately known across the state as the General, was appointed to a Veterans Advisory Board consulting on civic policy and mentoring young service members transitioning to civilian life. And me, I wrote it all down. Not just for the courts, not just for the news, but for families like ours who needed to know that resistance is not futility. That fear does not get the final word. That justice, though slow, can find its way even through the thickest lies. 5 years later, Eastview Heights looks the same on the outside. Tree-lined streets, perfect lawns, children on bikes. But its soul is different. Stronger. Kinder? More united. We renamed the community park after Tommy Sterling. A bronze plaque beneath the flagpole reads, "One voice can echo forever." Each Memorial Day, families gather there, not just to honor soldiers lost in war, but those who kept fighting after coming home. Emily reads a poem each year. She's taller now with a quiet strength in her voice. She wants to study law to protect people like Grandpa protected us. The neighborhood has a new motto printed on banners and etched into benches. Never fold to fear, never silence the truth. Grandpa says our family didn't just survive. We helped rewrite the rules. And in a world full of bullies with badges and clipboards, that's no small victory. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on distant soil. They unfold in your own front yard. What our family learned through this storm wasn't just how to gather evidence or face legal systems. We learned the power of strategic courage. Courage isn't loud. It's not always swinging fists or shouting at injustice. Sometimes it's sitting silently with your child while she's scared. It's keeping records telling the truth when no one's listening yet, and standing up not just for yourself, but for every family too afraid to. We also learned how predators thrive in silence. Bullies like Meredith count on your fear, your fatigue, your self-doubt. But when good people unite, when evidence speaks louder than rumors, and when one voice refuses to stay buried, everything changes. You don't need to be a general to protect your family. You just need to decide that fear won't win. Injustice hides behind procedure. So let truth stand in daylight. And never assume you're alone because someone else is always watching, waiting for permission to speak up. Be that permission. If you're facing HOA harassment or intimidation, don't suffer in silence. Start by documenting everything, dates, names, photos, and copies of every letter or citation. Install security cameras if possible, and talk to neighbors. You'd be surprised how many are going through the same thing but feel isolated. Contact your city's records office and verify whether the HOA has legal authority. Many operate without valid charters. Don't hesitate to consult an attorney, especially if children are being threatened. Local veteran or legal aid organizations can help. Most importantly, speak up. Report patterns to state agencies or your local press. You don't need a viral story or a courtroom speech to make a difference, just persistence and support. Bullies operate in darkness. Your light doesn't have to be loud, just consistent.